It has been my pleasure to serve as the COA co-chair for the last 2 years, and I'm honored to have been selected to continue the work for another term. And I really value the partnership that we have with the Commission and the collegiality that exists between the two bodies. I think it's very important. I want to start out by saying that the COA does understand the unfortunate necessity that Cheryl mentioned of modifying accreditation activities for the past year. But we do want to specifically thank you for determining that we would reinstate visits for the current year. We do recognize the importance of efficiency and being fiscally sound. And we do have the conversation frequently with COA members about what is the value of the site visit. Is that something, because it's very expensive, that is possibly dispensable? But what we hear time and again from team leads and BIR members is that the information that's gleaned from the site visit is just invaluable. We learn things that we just couldn't learn any other way. So thank you again. So I'm going to just take some highlights from the item and then answer some questions. And I will start with our charge of ensuring program quality. This is a section where you typically see the number of site visits that were conducted, but we only had one full visit, as Cheryl mentioned, in 12-13. And as a context, we have been asked as to how many institutions actually receive full accreditation versus those that receive stipulations. So I want to take a minute to talk about those numbers, and I have a beautiful chart here. We have data from when the CTC site visits started again in 7-8. In 6-7 we had some visits, but those were NCATE visits. So starting in 07-08 and then going through the last full year of activities, which was 11-12, in total, 64% of institutions out of 112 visits received full accreditation, and then the balance received either some stipulations or major stipulations or probationary stipulations, and that was very few, thankfully. I think the big number that comes out of this information, and again I'm happy to talk about it more later if you want, is that between 08-09, which is the second year of the cycle, up to 11-12, the number of institutions and the proportion of institutions receiving full accreditation has steadily risen. And so in 11-12, we had 82% of visited institutions receiving accreditation with no stipulations, and we had only 7 institutions, or 18%, that received stipulations, but we had no major stipulations and no probationary stipulations. So we can't draw any causal inference, but this suggests that institutions are getting better and better at preparing for accreditation. Did you want to say anything else about that? Okay. All right. So the accreditation activities work plan adopted by the Commission in June of 2012 included the recommendation that the Commission continue with scheduled revisits and site visits. And so we had 7 institutions that received some kind of a visit. 6 institutions reviewed did not require another visit afterwards, and a list of the institutions that had a site visit or a revisit I won't read to you. It's provided in section 2 of the report. In addition, we did have follow-up with 2 institutions that were given full accreditation but had a 7th-year report required. That is an option that the COA does exercise from time to time to receive full verification of completion of all stipulated activities or required activities. So I'm going to move on to the additional activities that we have that we had completed in 12-13. We added a chapter in the accreditation handbook to address revisits, because this was an area that was really under-explicated in the previous iteration of the handbook. We did continue to train BIR members. We actually were able to train about 50 members, and that's really in anticipation of the reinstitution of site visits. We're going to be very, very busy in the coming year, and I'll talk about that plan coming up. Some other new areas we explored: we started work on the development of the pilot completer survey. We started the discussion of, as we've mentioned here a little bit, which standards provide the most leverage and the most information, and sort of starting that work to look at possibly streamlining some of the accreditation processes moving forward. We talked, as you know, about cost recovery, and you just covered that item. We are still very busy approving new programs as well in the last year. In 12-13, even with a suspension of site visits, the COA approved 52 new credential programs, and those are listed in Section 2 for your reference. And you might also notice as well that clear education specialist induction programs and clear administrative services credential programs are the areas that experienced the most growth in their numbers in the last year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about program assessment. As I mentioned, the necessary work of accreditation went forward even as we suspended the site visits. And these reviews were conducted in the most cost-effective way possible, with reviewers being sent documents and devoting their own time on their own schedule, as Cheryl mentioned earlier. I will note, though, that this did, while it was more cost-effective, it did extend the time that it took for the reviews to be complete. It wasn't as efficient as we would have hoped, and so it did extend the time for institutions to get feedback on their program assessment documents. Also, part of the suspension plan for the that was planned involved deferring document submission for program assessment for the blue cohort. So the blue cohort has been submitting their documents starting this fall, and I think finishing up this month. We had programs transition to new standards, education specialist and reading. The COA did provide guidance and oversight to review programs in the education specialist area, and we had 36 institutions complete that process, and another 34 institutions transition to the new reading certificate and reading specialist programs. I will also mention that the staff and the COA worked very closely with individuals in the PPS social work programs to develop and adopt a crosswalk of standards, and also the Council on Social Work and Education Policy and Accreditation Standards. We did that work as well. So I will conclude my presentation with the highlights of the work plan for 2013-14. We have site visits resume, 35 scheduled site visits and 2 revisits for a total of 37. We're going to be very, very busy reading a lot this spring. We will continue our efforts. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I can't talk. We'll resume continue our efforts to develop surveys, and we look forward to continuing to explore the possibility of using data from a statewide survey to inform accreditation activities and decisions. The COA is very interested in this work, and also to developing additional surveys for alumni and other possible key stakeholders. We plan to continue to explore the possibility of identifying and formally acknowledging exemplary practices. That's a very exciting new piece of work, to add some sort of exemplary designation as a component, a formal component of an accreditation decision. With regarding the TPA, we will be exploring strategies to determine standards related to the effective implementation of the TPA, and with the understanding that this conversation will necessarily expand based on what we learn about the piloting of the EdTPA. We will continue to focus on consistency in data reporting. That's a big issue. We are looking to identify what kinds of data provide good information about candidate competencies, and in particular with regard to the biennial report. We get great rich data from biennial reports, but it can be all over the map, I think it's fair to say. And as part of that work, we're going to be looking at exploring ways to use experts from the field in reviewing the biennial reports as we do for program assessment. And finally, we'll be focusing on the relationship, the evolving work that results from the marriage of TIAC and NCATE into CAPE, and how that new organization will work with the CTC and COA protocols. That's going to be a critical part of our work in 13-14. So thank you so much for your attention. Again, despite my restraint in avoiding sausage-making analogies, the COA appreciates the support, direction, and collaborative relationship that we enjoy with the commissioners, and our work is all the better for our mutual commitment to educator excellence. Thank you.